everyone. Welcome to the very first ever event in the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay English Department's Student and Faculty Reading Series. I'm Dr. Juli and I've been working with Dr. Chris Williams to put together a series of readings that will take place every semester. And our goal with this reading series is to highlight student work as well as faculty work and to create conversations around those things. So nice to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming. We have a lot of awesome readers tonight, and before we get started, I'm just going to give the UWGB land acknowledgement. So, we at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay acknowledge the First Nations people who are the original inhabitants of the region. The Ho-Chunk Nation and the Menominee Nation are the original first people of Wisconsin, and both nations have ancient historical and spiritual connections to the land that our institution now resides upon. Today, Wisconsin is home to 12 First Nations communities, including the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, Forest County Potawatomi, Ojibwe Nation communities, Stockbridge-Munsee Band of the Mohicans, and the Brothertown Indian Nation. We acknowledge the First Nations people of Wisconsin. All right, so just to give a quick overview of how things are going to work tonight, we have readings by 3 student readers, Elizabeth Asmus, Amelia Boylan-Knorr, and August Wiegman. Unfortunately, Dr. Rebecca Meacham, who is scheduled to read tonight, was called away on an unexpected family issue and won't be reading tonight, but hopefully we will hear from her at another event in the future. So we're going to feature the readers in alphabetical order, and each one will read for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions from the audience. So there's a Q&A function as part of the team's setup. It's closed right now while the readers are reading, but afterwards, if you have questions for all or some of the readers, feel free to type them in there and we will pass them on to them and spend some time asking them about their work and the things that inspire them, and tips for writing, discussions of their process. Any of those kinds of things are great. All right, so I think we'll just go ahead and get started. Our first reader is Elizabeth Asmus. Elizabeth Asmus is 22 years old and currently attending the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. She will graduate in December 2020 with a writing and applied arts major and a communication minor. She previously attended the University of Wisconsin-Fond du Lac, where she obtained an Associates of Arts and Science degree. She has completed writing 2 novels, a novella, and an assortment of poems and short fiction pieces. Elizabeth has had 3 works published. Poems Vacation and Wild were published in the UWGB Green Bay, Manitowoc campus undergraduate journal Northern Lights, and a 2-sided sport was published in UW Green Bay's undergraduate journal Sheep's Head Review. Please welcome Elizabeth Asmus.
Hello. So I'm going to be reading 2 poems, a short fiction loop story and a nonfiction piece. So I'm going to start with the poem Wild. Content to create madness, chaos over sanity. Streaks of color pass, no way of telling what's ripping up the dying grass until it stops. Break in action, 3 paws, keep watch, waiting for movement. Like a detonation, all dart back to blurs. Small yipes pierce the tranquil air, drawing attention from all kinds. Cutting corners too short, a crash. Yet the 3 bounce back on their feet, tearing through freshly raked leaves. Nothing stopping the wildness, the weightless feeling of running free, happy to live in disarray. The second poem is Vacation. In the summer, floral scents mix with the woody traces of the outdoors. A passive breeze blows through the trees, sounding wind chimes and entrancing melodies. Upon a hill, a small log cabin appears. Sunlight filters through, paints shadows around the yard. Out back sits a lake, surface like glass, filtering the reflections of dynasties. Waves roll upon the sandy shores, while the top ripples with excitement as predators dive, scattering fish. Deer dart across the weathered road, peering out from depths unknown. Laughter from young and old join the birds' happy song, knowing memories are overflowing and cherished. Then I have the flash fiction loop story, which is where you have the beginning of a sentence match the end. So this one is called Madness. Rain poured through the angry sky, soaking everything on its way. Way back in the safety of the trees, the dog watched the swaying trees that have been around longer than the family had lived there. There were rapidly forming puddles at the roots spreading through the yard like fingers reaching out, Out of view, other animals hid in the woods, waiting for the rain to move on to another city or part. Part of the dog wanted to run around in the mud that would surely get everywhere his owners wouldn't like. Like the time he dug up a stick and tracked mud into the kitchen, resulting in a scolding. Scolding was something he wanted to avoid. Avoid like rabies. Rabies was something he thought the raccoon outside had he known exactly what it looked like, of course. Of course he heard stories of white foam at the mouth and walking around in the daytime, but whether they held any truth was the question. Questions popped around in his head a lot. People often assumed he didn't know much because he was a dog, but that wasn't the case. Case was, he understood more than they thought. They just didn't want to believe it. It would force them to reconsider how they acted around him, and that wouldn't be all right. All right was how things were now. He didn't mind being underestimated. Underestimated just meant he got more information and had more fun. Fun wasn't something on the table for today. Today seemed to be what the humans referred to as reading weather. Weather often was predicted, but it changed. Changed today from being hot and humid to a day full of gloom and pouring rain. And then finally, I have the nonfiction piece, A Two-Sided Sport. Softball is one of the sports that I love. The uneven sand beneath my cleats, the soft leather of the glove, even the metallic pop when the ball connects with the barrel of the bat. I love it all. When I played, I wasn't the best on the team, but I also wasn't the worst. I joined the sport to have fun and embrace the semi-competitive culture of sports. It often was friends playing against friends, and you never know who would be on your team since they had drafts each spring. The rec league, as we called it, was one of my favorite things about summer growing up. When the time came, I decided to take a chance and sign up for high school softball too. I knew it would be more competitive, but I didn't think it would change things too much. And at first, I was right. I still love the sport and experienced one of my favorite high school athletic career memories. My freshman through junior years were spent on the junior varsity team, and I couldn't have been more grateful. My coaches stayed the same and were able to help us progress each year since they already knew us and how we played. The practices were laid back yet productive, and I ended up learning a lot of different techniques, most of which I haven't used in years now, but they were put to good use my junior year. Each year, near the end of the season, we had a conference tournament, and while I had been playing, we lost each time. Our conference wasn't fantastic, but they were pretty solid when it came to their lineups. So my team got to Kewaskum early, and we warmed up an hour before the game, an unspoken rule, and the weather was perfect. The sun was already out, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. We were set to play 3 games that day. Over the course of the day, we managed to win the first 2 games, which secured a spot in the championship. Campbellsport would be our opponent, and we had lost in an embarrassing fashion only weeks before. Many of us weren't sure we could pull it off, but our coaches stressed that if we just continued to play and not care about winning, anything could happen. Looking back now, the game is mostly a blur except for 1 inning. Something had taken a hold of the team and everyone was getting hits. The Campbellsport pitcher was good, but we were getting her timing down. And when it was my turn to bat, I was nervous. I knew that I needed to have a big inning because Campbellsport had won in the late innings during our earlier game, so every hit counted. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the plate. It was an unspoken rule for myself to watch the first pitch, so that's exactly what I did. I was ready for the next pitch, and when the ball crossed into the hitting zone, I swung, heard a pop of the bat, and took off running. The helmet I was wearing was loose on my head, so I couldn't see that great. But luckily my coaches and teammates were loud enough that I could hear to get down and slide into second. I had a smile on my face, and when I stood up and looked over at one of my coaches, he gave me a thumbs up. For me, it validated why I was playing. Sure, it was competitive, but it wasn't all about the winning. It was about having fun, enjoying the sport, and working as a team. We ended up winning the tournament that day, and I love the sport more than ever. I continued to play in the summer and fall leagues. I even tried travel ball. When spring of the senior year came, It was bittersweet to know that I wouldn't be on the junior varsity team anymore. The varsity coach wanted lots of players to warm his bench. Somehow, though, I was hopeful. I knew I could play, and I hoped I would get the chance, since that was what had happened on the junior varsity team. I suffered through all the practices before the season started, even the dreaded 5:30 in the morning ones. When we came upon spring break, I knew that I'd be gone, so I talked to the coach. He said we were having player meetings that week, and so I agreed to have it early. He ended up telling me what I already knew. I had some errors in practice and needed to clean them up. I left that day feeling confident that I could improve and hopefully get some playing time. However, when I returned from spring break, everything changed. I learned there had been a couple other girls who were gone as well, and we were informed by the coach that since we missed those practices, we would have to sit out for at least half of our next game. At first, it seemed okay, since we were all in the same boat and we went on with practices. When the next game day arrived, though, I was the only one sitting up. Sure, there were the extra girls he brought up from the JV and the extra position players on the bench with me, but the other girls that were gone for spring break played the whole game. I grew frustrated as I watched my grandma and parents sit on the bleachers in the rain, waiting for a chance to see me play that never came. I continued to practice and hold on to hope that I would get my chance the next game. The coach said that everyone had a part to play on the success of the team, but here I was wondering what mine was. Before the next game, I learned my part. Coach informed me I would be the designated bunter. Just what I was hoping for. When the game started, it was sleeting, which is completely awful when you're just sitting on the bench, and I grew cold very quickly. Sure, we had to run a lap down the warning track to get the blood flowing in between each inning, but how's that going to help when you go back and sit for 15 minutes to a half hour again? Suddenly, after sitting again, mind you, I was told to get my batting gear since I was pinch hitting. At that point, I was so frozen I couldn't feel my fingers and I just wanted to go home, but I had to go hit. I ended up watching 3 strikes go by without attempting a swing, and I can still see the frustration on the coach's face. It brings me an odd sense of satisfaction. It was a subtle screw you that I couldn't say out loud. Too bad we didn't lose that game. That would have added to the feeling. As discouraged as I was, I ended up deciding to give it one more game. I wasn't a quitter, so I had to try to be true to myself and stick it out. I also wanted to continue doing what I loved, but if I didn't get a chance during the next game, I knew I wouldn't get to start because the lineup stayed consistent once the coach liked his odds. I forced myself through another round of practices, and I tried my best to show I was improving. When the third game came around, I found myself warming his bench yet again while he brought up a junior varsity player to fill the open position that I normally played. All the anger and frustration that had been building since spring break was starting to break through, but I kept a lid on it. Causing a scene wouldn't have done me any good. However, I was starting to forget why I loved the sport, and I didn't want to lose that completely. So the next day, I found the coach while he was doing his early morning rounds at the school and told him I wanted to talk. His first response was that he was busy and I could do it later, but I wasn't going to wait. I told him that I was quitting, and all he said was, "That's your decision." I already knew that. He didn't ask why or show any kind of concern. Even some surprise would have sufficed, but he just stood there, and it was then that I realized I never stood a chance from the beginning. He was just stringing me along. I regret not telling him how I really felt, and I regret being too nice to tell him to screw off. He deserved it, yet I couldn't bring myself to do it. Maybe it was because I didn't want to make a scene, or maybe it was because I knew it wasn't worth it because he wouldn't listen. In the end, it came out okay because, like every single year before, the team choked in the playoffs to get to state. It brought me a little bit of satisfaction knowing that I didn't miss anything, that he had tried to appear like the team was unbeatable, but in the end, they were beat every single time. And it's happened every single year since then, too. I still crack a smile when I hear they lost. As time passed, I realized I'm glad that I quit. Some people might think it was too early since there was only 3 games into the season, but I'm positive that it was the right time. I wasn't having fun anymore, and each time practice was over, I found myself irritable and unhappy. I didn't want to become that person for the rest of my senior year. I deserved better, and my friends and family did too. Of course, I miss being on the field every day and being a part of the team. I still do, but it was the best thing that I did. I didn't have to sit on the bench and watch my passion for softball disappear through my fingers like the sand. I didn't know then that one sport would have both the best and worst memories of my athletic career. I went in open-minded and made a lot of memories I'll remember for years to come, and there's no way I'll forget how I loved the game. Sometimes I wish I could go back and change things or even force myself to finish it out, but then I remember had I not quit, I wouldn't have been able to truly enjoy everything that came with the last year of high school. I would have been too consumed by disappointment and frustration. Maybe one day I'll be able to get back on the field and play for the fun of it again, but if I don't, I still have my years on JV to look back on. They made the most of the worst times worth it. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. That was awesome. All right, up next we have Amelia Boylan-Knorr. Amelia Boylan-Knorr is a senior majoring in English with a creative writing emphasis. She's also the current president of Sigma Tau Delta. Sarah Waters is one of her favorite authors, and Passing by Nella Larson is her favorite book.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. So I'm going to be reading 2 pieces. I'm going to be reading a short fiction piece that was actually published in the Sheepshead Review last spring, and then I'm going to be reading a free verse poem. So we'll go ahead and start with the short fiction piece. It's called Secret Kisses. Okay. She kissed girls in secrecy, in the shadowed corners of basements at house parties, locked bathroom stalls in dimly lit bars, and in the tunnel slides at public parks. She had managed to pass through high school and into adulthood with her true desires undetected. Growing up in the small town of Ekron, Nebraska, that was lucky. The town breathed gossip, and she was glad she had never been the target of its conversation. Perhaps all the girls she kissed were sealing her between their lips as their secret too. Perhaps they were embarrassed by their participation, or had only been curious. But she never was. She savored each memory, grabbing for remembrance in those shared secret kisses each time her boyfriend held her at night. She had only ever been called Evelyn her entire life. That was until she turned 26, and a beautiful girl with dark brown eyes and a curious look introduced herself in the twilight streets after the bar closed. Audrey called her Evie, and traced her fingertip over the lines of Evelyn's left hand in secrecy between her cotton sheets. That tender motion kept Evelyn from arguing, kept her insistence to be called Evelyn stuck in her throat like half-chewed food. How many more soft secret kisses could she keep? Did she only ever want to be Evelyn, or find out what life as Evie could be? She wanted to be free, but she was afraid of what that meant. In a world where you could lose everything, family, long-standing friendships, comfort, reputation, dignity, safety, for loving someone, was being loved in return enough? I can't be your secret anymore, Evie. You agreed to wait until I was ready to, I know, but I can't anymore. I can't be something you hide in your house. I want a relationship, someone I can walk outside with and not have to worry about my hand being dropped if their sister or dad or whoever shows up. I am choosing you, but I'm not ready to lose my family, Audrey. Stop. Choose me, Evie. Choose me. I need more time. She reached for Audrey's hand, the one she had found herself in. Audrey pulled away and breathed out. I'm not embarrassed by us like you are, Evie. I can't lose myself to protect you. I don't want to be your secret anymore. You promised. She lifted the cotton sheets, hoping Audrey would crawl in and be her secret for a little bit longer. I want us, but not like this. Audrey turned to hide her tears. Goodbye, Evelyn. Her hand would never feel Audrey's tender touch scribbling forever into her palm ever again. This was why Evelyn hated nicknames. She hated their closeness, their meaning. She hated the memories that they held to connections that were frayed from the beginning. She loved being Evie, and now she hated being Evelyn. Not because she couldn't change herself, and not because she wanted to, but because she was taught that girls who kiss girls and boys who kiss boys were bad. Taught by family, friends, the news, the church, and public opinions. She learned to be ashamed of the most natural part of herself. She let Audrey go, ignored who she was, tried to suppress herself and her sadness further into the secrecy of her sheets. All anybody ever talked about was wishing they could find complete happiness, hoping for it, blowing out candles and praying into thin air for it. Love should never be something that's viewed as wrong. It's the most effortless feeling humans experience next to fear. But for her, happiness would forever be half. For her, it would only exist in secret kisses. Okay, so that's the end of that one. Now, this free verse poem I've actually rewritten quite a few times, so we'll see. This one's called Unrealistic Expectations. Okay. Dear 21st century women, we are no longer expected to cover ourselves with knee-length skirts, expected to only be housewives who blend into the walls behind the closed doors of men's houses, expected to remain uneducated, unintelligent, empty ciphers, expected to only speak when spoken to uplift men and reaffirm their worth while ours is suffocated under their iron fists. No, we are no longer expected to live by those rules. Instead, we are expected to live under a new set of dictatorship, one where we are thrown into the ocean, our tiptoe is the only support keeping us from floundering, but still our heads are above the water. So we must be free and equal. We can vote. We can receive equal pay. We can wear pants and suit jackets in public without being arrested. We can attend college and earn our degree. Women are equal now, so we don't need to fight anymore, right? We aren't bending and breaking our backs to fill the mold of a patriarchal socialization and expectations. We aren't barred by religions run by men with pro-life pickets in their hands stating our bodies are not our own. Wake up. Wake up, you younger generations. Women are not equal. Walmart has faced charges for eliminating pregnant women from their aisles and handing over $1.16 less to those who possess breasts. Birth control is controlled. You're an assumed slut if you try to protect yourself. You're a tease if you try to remain pure. If you're being harassed at work, expect to be moved to a new department or become the best at dodging bombs because you'll be asked, do you always smile at people like that? Even though you are expected to smile at everyone who passes by. Whoa, it went away. Sorry. You're forced to echo into the void that you are not the problem, but you are, my dear young girl. You are the problem because you're a woman. We are expected to be both a provider and a little housewife. Expected to want to be a mother, eyed with judgment if we say we don't want children or don't have them quite yet. Expected to be intelligent and beautiful, but not more intelligent than beautiful to ensure that men don't feel intimidated. We're expected to remain supportive, even if that man's idea is half-witted. Expected to be independent, but not so self-sufficient any man would feel unneeded. So stretch your legs, ladies, because you'd better keep one foot in the past and one foot in today, where you're expected to be both woman and man, mentally, physically, emotionally. But we no longer have to fight, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. That was great. All right, and our final reader for tonight is August Wiegman. August Wiegman is a double major in creative writing and writing in applied arts. They are currently the managing editor for Sheepshead Review, UWGB's Journal of the Arts. Their work has been published in Sheepshead Review and in Northern Lights, UWGB Marinette's journal. Thanks.
Hi everyone. So I thought I'd open up with something a little spooky since it's almost Halloween and my work tends to lean towards a darker, spookier type in general. So my first piece is the only one, well, I'm reading all poetry and my first piece is the only one that I'll provide any story for. So this is the story of the hind deer, which is a cryptid that my friends and I created while we were away on a camping trip. If you don't know what a cryptid is, just think like Bigfoot and Mothman, that type of thing. The hind deer is a deer that stands on his hind legs because his front legs are broken, and he stalks human prey in the night. It's mostly a joke among friends, but one day I thought I'd take a stab at a creepy little poem about the hind deer, so here it is. The hind deer. The night is rustling in your chest cavity, deep and dark winds swirling, unrepentant and chilled. You are not alone. Have you ever been truly alone? The night watches you through eyes reflecting like mirrors in the brush. You slap a mosquito against your arm and the insect bursts, red and sticky, warm with your own blood. The night drinks you in, its horns sharp and body misshapen. Can you see the night? Can you smell it? It can smell you. Tell me about the oppressive darkness that weighs heavy, wet cloth. Tell me about the sound, hooves against dirt, a human stance, a shotgun off in the distance. Tell me about the night and how it swallowed you whole. My next two pieces were published in the spring 2020 edition of Sheepshead Review. The first one is called Please Take a Number. I've reserved the right to be angry. I waited in line, I took my ticket, and I sat, very silently I sat, and I waited. I have heard much anger from the mouths of others. One screams harsh and visceral, words clawing out of their throat, and another whimpers its anger, poignant. Now the hour is mine. I do not know how to be angry in any way that counts, but I have waited for this time and now I sit with it. I hold this feeling like putty in my hands, stretch it until it breaks and then further. It is stuck to my fingers, all over my clothes. It has somehow found its way into all the cracks between everything. I throw it all in the washing machine, my hands, my clothes, everything, and the machine breaks. Now I am naked, handless and angry, scratching at my eyes with non-existent claws. And you are here and nowhere, long gone and staring me in the face. Do you know how to leave? Did you ever know how to stay? And the second one is called Sleeping Season. The carcass lies rotting on the side of the road, and your chest twists despite the familiarity. It seems everything is dying around you, spindly legs carrying the deadness on their backs as they trudge through the wet. You have to keep yourself pried open, or else you'll collapse inward under the leaves in the middle of the forest where no one will ever find you. It seems easier that way, doesn't it? But elongating the worst of it is half the fun. You can consume and let your eyes droop shut in the afternoon as if that will cure anything, but it won't. So peer out the window as if the bare trees have something to teach you. Breathe in the wind and pretend it tastes sweet. Crack yourself open like a can of beer that you'll gag as you drink, but just get it down so you can feel something. Drain your blood if you so please. Let it seep into the soil and fuck with the wildlife. Let it tint the world red. Your carcass lies rotting on the side of the road like it's been there for years and, well, hasn't it? This next piece was published in the 2020 issue of Northern Lights. It's called Strawberry Blonde. Come to me glowing and warm. Tears sit on a precipice of nothing. Your knuckles are a deep, pretty shade of blue. You have always been in love with the place where everything is born. You have always loved too hard, knocking teeth out of the wet, dark mouth of the sky as if it were your God-intended purpose. Come to me now. I will count your breaths and hold them to my chest in a curled fist. So before this reading, I had mentioned to Dr. Meacham that my work often contained elements of gore, and I didn't want to disappoint her, and even though she's not here, I'm still going to read them. So I picked the next three pieces with that particularly in mind. So this is also a general warning. If you don't like that kind of stuff, feel free to tune out for a couple minutes. The first one here is a work in progress that I'm currently parsing through, but I still wanted to share. It's called In the Case of an Unsatisfying Death. I left my body on the interstate, besides the others lucky enough to test fate and fail, deer, opossums, raccoons, the occasional porcupine. I too began to rot, and with the rot came desiccation, the bloating, and the flies. Vultures had their way with me, circling before shrieking, diving, pecking into deterioration, into softened flesh. I unraveled piece by piece, and when I could take the ugliness no longer, I stood, collected all my spilled parts back into myself, and held them there with bony hands. My car, left untouched by all the feasting things, welcomed me back into the driver's seat, a makeshift home. Engine spurring, seats covered in gore, heart pumping, an unusual rhythm, we pulled back onto the highway and said goodbye to that inane corruption. Next is called Sweet Sticky. Do you think of me often, honey? When the air drips its sticky hotness licking at your skin and eyeballs roll back into sockets where they're always meant to be. It's a certain relief, isn't it, sweetheart? Never mind the permanence of it all, because nothing is ever, and I mean this, ever permanent. Fingernails scrape at dead skin, and worms bear their softness to the sun after rain. Wonder this for me now. Why do we say anything? What's the point when we are constantly misunderstood? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's destiny to speak and speak and speak, and to never be heard. The baby's wailing down the hall again, and I swear I turned off the clock, but by God is it making a racket. Can we stop it all, darling? Shove a fork into the socket, feel like a kid again. That ugly platitude of childhood, that ache you feel in your bones when your mama's crying in the bedroom. Try to understand it, at least once. He'll scratch your eyes out before you can say please. Don't doubt me on that. And the next one is called Scratch. We scratch and cut and pick and undo, ripped apart at the seams to understand what's underneath, only to sew the fractured pieces back together in the wrong order, or rather in a new order, a new way to understand, a new way to control, to explore. Peek beneath this self-contained violence before you tie it all together. Pop an eyeball out of the socket and hold it in your hand. Look upon it with its own kin. Dismembered and leaking, we ache to understand our relation to others. How are we the same, and how do we differ? We are scarred with stitch marks, centipedes crawling across our skin from joint to joint, hidden or out to sea, powdered up to appease or showcased without thought or with utmost deliberation. Forgive yourself for the damage you have done, born of the frustration of unknowing. Anchor your unkindness, consider it closely. Take a bone out and wear it as a pendant. Drop your anger, sheath your claws. That's enough for today. Deprive yourself of the correct tools, and how will you live? But you will, you will. A wasteland, a garden, full and sweet, anxious and broken, never one or the other, always in synchrony. At war with ourselves and indifferent to that fact, looking upon our bodies from another's eyes as if devoid of connection. You are not me, you say to yourself, but aren't you? And the next piece was published in the fall 2018 issue of Sheepshead Review. It's called Saturate. You wonder, just once, what would it be like? His hands around your wrists, his words surging out of your throat. The rain pours hard against the roof, and you wonder, just twice, could you take it? Alphabet soup spills red on the floor, and the letters spell a word that doesn't exist. Tell me now, what are you thinking? Are you thinking about the night when you ached so thoroughly that your insides found a way out? Or are you thinking about the day when you ran as fast as you could down the abandoned road, bare feet against crumbling pavement until your soles left indicators of where you had been? Either way, you're thinking too hard, so sit a minute, breathe in, and then out. The roof is drowning. Your eyes fill, your mouth fills, you fill until your body is bursting at the scars. That one from when you were 6 and you stuck your hand down in the recliner. That one from when you were 4 and your brother threw that piece of wood at you, blood all over the bathtub. You think of watermelon, sticky and all too sweet. You think of crushing a skull under the heel of your floral printed boot. And you think of a tortured frog. They throw it again and again at the side of the house. It is long dead, but they will not stop. And you wonder, just once, Just twice, just as many times as it takes. Will you make it? Thank you, everyone, for listening.
I think I was muted there. Thanks, August. That was great. That was really awesome. All right, so we're going to start the Q&A now, and I think I can open it. Let's see. Yeah, so hopefully you should be able to type in questions. I think I'm going to start things off just by asking each of our readers to kind of talk in turn about things that influenced some or one of the pieces that they read tonight, and talk a little bit about your process with those pieces and kind of how you worked through them, or if you're still working through them, how you're currently thinking about them. And I think maybe we'll just kind of go through in order. So maybe go back to Liz. And as they're talking, go ahead and type your questions in the chat box and we will ask those too.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the poems that I read, Wild and Vacation. So basically with those, I see like the Wild is about my dogs running in the yard. So I see that practically like every day. So I wanted to capture their movement and what they're doing without explicitly stating that it was dogs, to kind of see if I could get the imagery to come across like with the yipes or with like blurring and running. And then for Vacation, it's about my grandparents' house. And so there's a lot of really unique imagery up there. And I wanted to kind of bring in parts of that without overwhelming, like in a sense. And so when I sat down to write these, they started off as actually like big paragraphs, and I worked and got them narrowed down to this like the stanzas, but it was kind of hard to try to cut out all this imagery that I've been seeing and wanted to add in there, but there wasn't kind of like a part for all of it. So those were some of my first poems actually. And then a little bit about Madness. It was very hard to write because of the having to match the end of the sentence to the beginning. And then at the very beginning, the first word and the last word had to match as well, which was very difficult to try to make things, I guess, make sense in a way. And I think after a lot of editing, I was able to get it to kind of match, but other than that, I think that's about it.
Sorry, I was expecting more. Okay, so for my pieces, let's start with Secret Kisses. So I was really fascinated with coming out stories at that point in my life. I just liked hearing them, and I noticed that not a lot of people, when they ask, so what's your coming out story, they don't really want to hear or much of the before. They just want to know how you did it and like what inspired that mainly. So I was kind of thinking about the internal and external struggles of a homosexual relationship where one person is not out yet and someone is proud and out. So, and how difficult that might be for those two people as individuals. So I really wanted to showcase how hard it would be for someone to be a secret, and then how hard it is for this person who doesn't necessarily want them to be a secret, but they're not quite ready to come out yet. And then that one actually it only took me like 30 minutes to write that one, surprisingly. It was a lot of fun. And then for that poem, Unrealistic Expectations, one of my professors actually had muttered under her breath one day, oh, but women don't think they need to fight anymore. But that's another story. And this professor, I love her. I was like, huh, what does that mean, I wonder? So I started really thinking about wage gaps and just a lot of things difficulties that women face. And I did some research into the workforce and discovered that stuff about Walmart. So I was like, no, we need to write a poem about this because it needs to be heard. People need to know these things. So I thought it would be fun to write. And it used to be like, I want to say 4 pages long. So I've cut it down maybe like 5 or 6 times. And yeah, it was a lot of fun to write.
So I don't really know which poem to talk about, so I guess I'll just talk about, in general, when I write poetry, you guys may have noticed that there's not much plot in many of these, because I try to go more for like encompassing an emotion than like parsing out a story. So like the first poem I read was like an emotion, like coming from fear, you know, the one about the hind ear, the cryptid. And other ones, like the one about anger, so obviously coming from a position of having anger, but like not knowing what to do with it exactly. I tend to write my poetry based, like a lot of imagery comes from like the month that it is. Like when it comes to fall, I end up writing a lot more poetry just because it's like cold outside. It's a little melancholy, you know. You're getting cold. The colors are getting a little bleaker. It brings a lot out of me. So that's when I write a lot of my poetry, is the fall. And that's basically all I have to say.
Thanks, guys. That was really interesting. So we're getting some questions from the audience, which is great. Several questions that are specifically geared toward certain ones of you. So a couple of people are wondering, Elizabeth, about your dog and the Peace Madness. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. We have a couple of questions for August about gore and dark, unsettling topics. Maybe we could do like have each of you talk a little bit about, so all of these questions that we have here are about inspirations, about dogs or about gore, unsettling things. Maybe Amelia, you could tell a little bit too about the things that normally inspire you to write. And Elizabeth and August, if you guys want to talk more about other influences you have besides the ones that are listed here. So just the things that kind of compel you to write or push you to write about certain things. What are the things that get you looking for your computer or your pen and wanting to write stuff down?
Hi. Okay, so for inspiration, I listen to people talk mainly. Like I said, my one professor just muttered under her breath and that inspired a whole poem. And then anything around me, like the world and nature specifically. So nature and just watching people and listening to them talk. That's it. Oh.
Well, I'll address the question first. It actually was not inspired by my dogs. I had a habit of writing a lot about people in my short fiction class. So I tried to do an opposite and do an animal. And it ended up being a dog because of how I wanted it to flow with the words, because of like going in the house and the people and relationships that way. So it actually kind of was just by chance. And as far as inspiration of my other pieces, I think a little bit is on emotional experiences and just kind of observing. A lot of the poems that I've written are based on like experiences of places that I've been or like traveled to. Like the dogs, it's where I've traveled with them to make them act like that or like run around crazy. So basically, I guess just to sum it up, it's more emotionally driven experiences.
I will also talk about the questions first. So Rachel and Zach's both, I can answer at the same time. So where did you get the ideas for more of the gory poems, and what was my motivation behind Scratch? So Scratch actually wrote in class, which you should pay attention and take notes probably instead of writing poetry, but you know, it happens sometimes. I was in a really great class with Professor Schutze my first semester at Green Bay, and it was major poetry, and her overarching topic, which we went through like the whole semester was embodiment. And so I think that really shaped a lot of my poetry after that class, because we read a lot about like how poets use embodiment in their poetry. And especially for Scratch, I was really interested in the idea of like, well, it's like self-harm, but in a way that may be constructive, like acting like a doctor in your own home, maybe. It's like dangerous, but like it's like the strive for knowledge, like to know what is in your own body, and like take a biology class maybe instead of doing that. But yeah.
All right, thank you. It looks like we have several questions about process. So we have some people wondering, what is the process you use? Do you prefer to write on a laptop or with pen and paper? What's your ideal writing environment? How often do you write? And you can take this question, I think, in any direction. So if you have ideas about how to get ideas, or what to do if you don't have time to write, or how to make time to write, anything like that, maybe we can just kind of hear from all of you about your process and how you like to approach writing.
Okay, so my process for writing is highly contingent upon what I am writing exactly. So usually if I'm writing something like a creative piece for class, there's an author called Amelia, and she talks about your shitty first draft, and I do that. So I will just, anything that I have in my mind, just write onto that paper, and then I'll go back and try to edit pieces out or move them around and then create the story from there. I typically look over my pieces anywhere from 3 to 5 times before I actually have the final draft. I always read them out loud the last 2 times as well, because it sounds way different when you're reading it out loud versus when you read it in your head. And then, let's see, I try to write every day at some point. I actually carry a notepad and a pen in my purse with me and in my car, just in case, because inspiration can hit you whenever. And usually, like, I think a lot, so I'll write my thoughts down and stuff like that. I do like writing in pen and paper better, but the laptop is much quicker. So if you've got a lot and you feel like you can't write it down fast enough, I definitely go ahead and type it out without shame. And then my ideal writing environment. I don't really think I have a set ideal environment unless it's something for class again, because I need the silence. But if I'm just writing to write, I can write outside. I can write in coffee shops, McDonald's, like I can write in friends' houses, anywhere. When I was younger, and this is probably gonna sound weird, but my mom can attest to this. When I was younger, I used to do my best work in the bathroom. So I would just sit in the bathroom for hours and like not let anyone else have a turn, just so I could finish my story.
So for the pen and paper or a laptop, I also prefer pen and paper. And one of the really first things, I think it was a novel that was nothing, but I actually wrote it all in a notebook. And again, yeah, laptop is a lot quicker, like Amelia said, but I think pen and paper feels more authentic almost, because you're kind of capturing in real time and you don't have to stop and look at any corrections that you might have to make. When do I come up with my best ideas? I don't really know, because I think it's kind of a toss-up. Like some of them can be worked into good ideas and other ones aren't going to go anywhere. And my ideal writing environment, I think it's kind of different than what I was taught, because in my writing classes, a lot of times they'd say, oh, go to a desk or a clean spot and quiet so you can focus. And I actually prefer to write like on the couch or in my bed with music playing and just like chaos. And I don't know if it like helps get things flowing or what, but and how often do I write? I try to write every day, but it doesn't always happen. Some days I can sit and write for hours, and others it doesn't happen at all. And I think when I'm trying to come up with ideas, I try to sometimes go off of what I've written before, maybe take something like an idea out of there and try to turn that into its own thing. And other times it's just I write until I find something, because sometimes you just have to write until you can find the idea.
So I'll be the contrarian here. I prefer writing on my laptop just because it's way easier, like Amelia said. I do write with pen and paper sometimes, but that's usually if I just don't have my laptop on me. Like, I wrote the poem that I was talking about, I wrote in class. I wrote that with pen and paper, and it can feel pretty cathartic, but also I make a lot of changes as I'm writing, so it's like too much scribbling on the page if it's paper and pencil. It's funny that this question about when I come up with my best ideas is from Kimberly, because I was actually talking with Kimberly earlier about how one of the poems I read today, the one about the body on the interstate where they get back in the car, actually just was about to fall asleep one night, and I had like the stupidest lines. I just jotted them down in like the note app on my phone, and going back in the morning I was like, this is so stupid, like it's so bad. But then I went back, I was like, at least I wrote it down, so I had the idea in the first place. My ideal writing environment, I guess, is my couch. I relate to Liz a lot in that I also listen to music and stuff when I'm writing. And how often do I write? You know, I try to write a lot. Doesn't always happen because I get distracted and procrastinate, but I do like my creative writing class right now with Professor Williams, because we get to write like every class period, and it's a lot of fun, gives us cool prompts, so that's good.
All right. Thank you all for those lovely answers. Can you all see the questions on the side if you wanted to like type some answers? I'm worried we're going to run out of time. The next question I want to get to is one right at the end. So this one is directed to August, but I think we can throw it out to everyone. So this person just asks, do you have any tips for someone who wants to write poems? And so maybe we can just kind of broaden this. Do you have any tips for people that want to write creatively, things that you learned or things that you feel like you could share for maybe new writers that are just starting to get into this?
I think the best piece of advice I could give anybody, or a tip, would be to not be too harsh on yourself, especially if you're just starting out, because no idea is necessarily a bad idea. You can always make something from an idea. And the next tips would be to definitely go back and reread your work. And if you're not happy with it or you're frustrated with it, don't erase it. Just take a minute away from it and come back to it and see if maybe that break will give you a little bit more clarity. As for poems, anything can go with poems. If I was terrible at poems, and I still think I am sometimes, but if you're having a hard time with traditional poetic rules and rhyming and whatnot, just you can do free verse like I did with that last poem. Most of the poems I write tend to be free verse, and they don't follow traditional rules. They don't have to rhyme. Anything goes with that. And there are a lot of really beautiful ones out there that you can look up on Google and just read.
For me, I would say a tip is to just write, because your first draft isn't going to be great most of the time. And if you keep writing, you're going to find what you actually want, and it's going to get better. When you start out, like I've had a lot of difficulty starting out a lot of times, just even coming up with ideas. So I go back to old pieces and just kind of reread and try to write out a different scene from there, just to kind of say, oh, maybe this can be something new, and revise. Like revise a lot is another thing, because it's going to take a while to get it where you want, and that's okay. And for poetry, like what poems for tips there? I would say maybe just try to get outside, because a lot of times nature can offer some of the best ideas.
Some tips I have for poetry are, well, this is just a general life tip, but don't be afraid to use Google for literally everything. I use Google when I'm looking for a certain word. Don't be afraid of thesauruses. Don't like put a whole lot of words you don't know in your poetry, but like if you just want to be reminded of a word you do know, it's a good way to like spice up your vocabulary. Don't wait for motivation to hit you. You have to make your own motivation. Otherwise, you know, maybe you'll have a dream and be like, I can write about that, but sometimes you gotta like search for something you can write about, and Google's also good for that. You could look at a picture and be like, oh, I could write a poem about this. You know, there's a bunch of ways to practice, and you don't have to share your poetry with anyone if you don't want to.
All right, so I think we probably have time for maybe 2 more questions, and this next one is mine. Since I'm moderating the Q&A, I get to throw in there. I was hoping you all could talk a little bit about other artists that have influenced you. So this can be authors of more traditional books, but also, you know, movies or music or even games. So anything that you feel like has influenced your writing in some way. If you could talk a little bit about some of those influences, maybe turn us on to some cool artists we should check out.
Okay. So I feel like most writers' #1 inspiration is definitely going to be their own life in some ways, because I know my life has definitely been a source of inspiration for a lot of my writing. But aside from that, if you have time, go and check out Sarah Waters, because she's a phenomenal writer. She's really good at creating suspense, and then you'll think you have it figured out, and you'll read a little bit further and you realize you don't. So by the end, you're always shocked, in my opinion. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, naturally, it's one of my inspirations as well. And then I like Nella Larsen's writing a lot, especially Passing. It's my favorite book. Yeah, those are some of my inspirations. And then I don't really know if I used to write a lot of music and songs, but I don't think any other artists really inspired that. I just like to do it. And then for movies, I like a lot of different movies. I like a lot of action movies. I especially like thrillers. So horror and thrillers and spooky things are a lot of fun for inspiration as well.
For my inspiration, it's kind of hard to narrow down because I've read so much. I feel like they kind of just blend together. But in general, I'd say any of like the novelists or short fiction authors that focus on setting. One also that I remember reading in class with Dr. Meacham is Goodbye Vitamin. And I think, if I remember right, that was, I'm not sure who the author is. I don't want to say in case I'm wrong, but there was a lot in there that was just kind of short sentences, but it was a lot of detail. And I try to kind of get sentences that can get their point across without being super long or like lose their meaning almost. And I guess a lot too, like Amelia said, comes from my own life, because I kind of just try to write just to get it there on a page and then see where it goes from there.
So I have 3 poets that I'd like to mention. My first one is Richard Seikin. He's a gay man and he writes a lot of poetry about trauma. He's a big inspiration to me because of the content of his poems, but also because he really experiments with formatting. Like a lot of his lines are really interesting, and like looking at one of his poems is like kind of looking at like a painting somehow, because it's actually his second poetry book is all about poems about painting. So I don't know, he's really cool. And then my second one is Mary Oliver. She writes a lot of natural poetry, and I find it very refreshing to read her poetry, especially my favorite is called Wild Geese. And my third one is Rafael Campo. I read him last semester with Dr. Schutze, and he's a doctor and a poet, and I found that really fascinating in his poetry.
All right, I think this is going to be our last question. I'll just say a quick thank you to everyone that's attended this meeting. It's so great to have you all here, and I've really loved getting to hear work by all of these lovely students. All right, so my last question for you three. So Hannah says, what kind of career do you see yourself in after graduation? I know some of you are graduating pretty soon, so maybe we can kind of have this question be kind of about where are you headed? Where are you going next after your time at UWGB? And if you don't know, that's totally fine too. Just tell us a little bit about your hopes and dreams for the future.
Okay, so ideally, I would like to teach high school students, but honestly, I'm just applying anywhere. I literally went on Indeed the other day and said English major, like English bachelor's, and all these jobs popped up. The coolest one I saw that you can get was an FBI analyst, and I was like, whoa, that's cool, just because I'm getting closer to when I can actually start applying for jobs and having interviews. So I don't really know. Ideally, I'd like to teach high school, but obviously FBI analyst would be pretty cool too. So I'm just gonna look into some jobs and take the interviews and see who wants me and then weigh out my options. It's exciting.
So what I hope to do after graduation is something in the editorial and publishing part or aspect. I haven't really figured out anything yet, which I probably should, seeing as December is pretty fast coming. But I'm hoping, because I love to read and write, that hopefully just putting resumes out there, kind of maybe getting feet in the door through internships to kind of say, hey, I'm ready to work.
I would love to work for a literary journal or like a publishing house. I don't have any solid plans yet because it's still a bit before I graduate, but right now I'm managing editor of Sheepshead Review, which is very fun and good experience. So I'm hoping that that will help me out when I get into the workforce. Ideally, I can make some money publishing writing, but capitalism is my enemy, so yeah.
All right, I think that's gonna round up our event. Thank you all again so much for coming. We're gonna have another one of these next semester. If you would like to participate, definitely shoot me or Dr. Williams an email. And otherwise, I guess keep an eye out for the announcement, and we'll hopefully see you again soon at the Faculty Student Reading Series. Thank you guys so much for coming.